Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our fourth session in our series on God's calling us and God's gifts to us. Hope you've been enjoying the series so far. For those of you following along in your Bibles at home, we are in the first book of Samuel, chapter 13, verses 1 through 15. For those of you that saw my series on issues that men face, the first series on issues that really everyone faces, I would argue, this was a lesson in there. I don't recall which lesson specifically, but regardless, just a little bit of quick background information on this story. Saul has just been installed as Israel's first king. After leading the people to victory over the Ammonites, Saul now faces another enemy, the Philistines. Although Samuel had distinctly told Saul to wait 7 days for him to come and offer sacrifices before Israel went to battle, Saul gets impatient and proceeds to offer the sacrifices himself. So that's sort of where we are in the biblical narrative. As always, we do have a couple icebreaker questions. First icebreaker question is, growing up, with what authority figure did you have the most run-ins? To be quite frank, I don't actually remember having many run-ins with authority figures when I was younger. However, I have been told that I had very much an unfiltered mouth when I was younger. And while I remember being that kid, I don't remember anything that I really did. So I guess if I really had to pick someone, it would either have to be my third or fourth grade teacher. Both of them probably got the worst of my being a little tyrant. But outside of that, I can't really think of any authority figures that I had run-ins with. Then again, maybe I've just suppressed those memories. Who knows? Anyway, what about you? Growing up, with what authority figure did you have the most run-ins? Let me know in the comments below. Our second icebreaker question is, are you generally early, on time, or late for meetings? For me, I am early. I learned at a very early age that you need to be early to everything. As my family jokes about now, we need to be to everything for the concert talk, which I don't know if all orchestras do this, but I know that the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, something my brothers and I were raised on going to, we had to be there for this talk about a half hour before the show started, when they would talk about the different pieces they were going to play, on and on down the line. Well, so I learned from a very early age to be early for everything. And I mean, also going to movies. If you want to see the previews of movies to come, you have to be there early, right? So generally, I'm early to things. I'm very rarely on time, and I'm almost never late for anything. So that's me. What about you all? Are you generally early, on time, or late for things? Let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, we'll get to the reading for today. Again, we are in 1 Samuel chapter 13, verses 1 through 15. Listen now for the word of our Lord. Saul was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned over Israel 42 years. Saul chose 3,000 men from Israel. 2,000 were with him at Michmash and in the hill country of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan at Gibeah in Benjamin. The rest of the men were sent back to their homes. Jonathan attacked the Philistine outpost at Geba, and the Philistines heard about it. Then Saul had the trumpet blown throughout the land and said, "Let the Hebrews hear." So all Israel heard the news. Saul has attacked the Philistine outpost, and now Israel has become a stench to the Philistines. And the people were summoned to join Saul at Gilgal. The Philistines assembled to fight Israel with 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers, and soldiers as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They went up and camped at Michmash, east of Beth Aven. When the men of Israel saw that their situation was critical and that their army was hard pressed, they hid in caves and thickets, among the rocks and in pits and cisterns. Some Hebrews even crossed the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. Saul remained at Gilgal, and all the troops with him were quaking with fear. He waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and Saul's men began to scatter. So he said, "Bring me the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings." And Saul offered up the burnt offering. Just as he finished making the offering, Samuel arrived, and Saul went out to greet him. "What have you done?" asked Samuel. Saul replied, "When I saw that the men were scattering and that you did not come at the set time, and that the Philistines were assembling in Michmash, I thought, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the Lord's favor. So I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering." "You acted foolishly," Samuel said. "You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. If you had, you would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time. But now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him leader of his people, because you have not kept the Lord's command." Then Samuel left Gilgal and went up to Gibeah in Benjamin. And Saul counted the men who were with him. They numbered about 600. This is the word of our Lord. Thanks be to God. So our first question for today is, what does Saul's rationale for offering sacrifices sound like to you? A good reason, a valid excuse, a poor excuse, a rationalization, or a snub of Samuel's authority? I would say a poor excuse and a rationalization. Saul is trying to rationalize his impatience. He's trying to basically get out of being punished for doing something he knew he shouldn't have done, something that he didn't have the authority to do. It's a rationalization. Basically saying, "You weren't on time, so I did it myself." He could have just as easily have gone into a surrounding town, found another prophet, said, "Do this burnt offering for me." He could have very well ordered one of his men to do it. Better yet, he could have been patient and waited for Samuel to arrive, but no, he didn't. It's a poor excuse and it's a rationalization, in my mind at least. Let me know if you disagree. What does Saul's rationale for offering sacrifices sound like to you? Let me know in the comments below. Number 2, who do you hold most responsible for Saul getting into trouble? The Philistines for oppressing God's people, the Israelites for deserting Saul, Saul himself for going ahead, or Samuel for cutting it so close? I kind of already answered this question in the last one, but Saul. He didn't seek advisors to figure out, what should I do? He did this of his own free will. He made a decision. He has to accept the consequences. Plain and simple. The Philistines weren't making him make these offerings. He wasn't doing it under duress. The Israelites weren't making him do it. Again, this wasn't some kind of blackmailing or threat. And Samuel? Okay, so he was a little late. That's not that's not the worst thing in the world in retrospect. I would argue it's Saul who's at fault, but that's me. Who do you think is most responsible? Let me know in the comments below. Number 3, how do you feel about Saul's punishment? It seems harsh, he got what he deserved, it shows following the Lord is serious business, or something else. Well, it definitely shows that following the Lord is serious business. I don't think there's really any denying that. Arguably, it does seem a little bit harsh. You made one mistake and God is basically casting you aside for someone else. But at the same time, Saul isn't just anyone. Saul is king. He is the leader of the people. He is the one who's supposed to be setting this example for the people in being a righteous king, being a righteous person, and he didn't. He went ahead with offering the burnt offering, which is something he hasn't been trained in doing. It's not something that he has been given the authority to do. He was told by God to wait for Samuel to arrive, so he just disobeyed God flatly. It seems a little harsh, yes, but I mean, he's being punished for his actions. He's getting what's coming to him. How do you all feel about Saul's punishment? Let me know in the comments below. Number 4, when it comes to waiting, how would you rate yourself on a scale from 1, being very impatient, to 10, very patient? I'm a 6 or a 7. I'm generally fairly patient, but if it's something that I really want, if it's something that I'm really anticipating, Vacation, or when I was younger, the next Harry Potter book, something like that. Yeah, that was... Waiting for the next Harry Potter book was torture. But waiting in general, it's not so bad. I can be a fairly patient person. I'm 6.5, we'll say. Right between 6 and 7, somewhere in there. What about you all? On a scale of 1 to 10, how patient are you when you're waiting? Let me know in the comments below. Number 5, what do you tend to do when things start to look bad? Withdraw, pray, get help, cry, talk to a friend, or something else? I definitely pray. You're reaching out to God, saying, your will be done, and then seeing how things play out. It's like, okay, that was God's will. There's not really anything that could be done about it. If it's something that can be helped, something that is within my power, probably get help. By no means do we have to do everything in life all on our own. The whole pulling yourself up by the bootstraps mantra doesn't really work for very long. Trying to do a lone wolf is not the easiest thing in the world, and really doesn't... It's actually more harmful than good, I would argue. But that's what I would do. I would get help if I would see it as, oh, I just need a few extra hands, and I would pray. If it's something that a few extra hands isn't going to help, then, or, one more head to think about, brainstorm about, I would definitely pray. Say, God, what do you want me to do? Where do you want me to go? How do you want me to go about this? But that's what I tend to do when things get bad. What about you all? What do you tend to do when things get bad? Let me know in the comments below. Number 6, how do you tend to relate to the following authority figures? All right, so there's a list. We'll go through them one by one. So all of these are, how do you relate to the following, these different authority figures? First one is your parents. I tend to relate very well to my parents. I get along very well with them. I talk with them on a more or less weekly basis. Realizing I didn't talk to them yesterday like usual, but anyway. I tend to relate fairly well with my parents. School authorities, when I was second, third, fourth grade, not so well. Outside of that, I got along very well with school authorities in kindergarten, first grade, fifth grade, and on up. I was actually in middle school and high school very much a brown noser and very much a teacher's pet. So, got along very well with them. Governmental authorities, can't say I've really had very many interactions with government authorities, so if I see something wrong, something that I would like to kind of make my opinion known about, I write my representatives, my senators, the president, whoever, and say, hey, I feel strongly about this. I would ask you to please hear my opinion when considering how you vote. With bosses and employers, I tend to relate to them fairly well. I mean, technically I'm employed by the presbytery. I can't think of anyone that I don't get along with. Really, God is my boss, and I like to think I get along with God. But as for the parishioners, I haven't heard any bad reports yet. So, yeah. I tend to relate to them fairly well. Spiritual leaders, well, when I was in 5th grade and below, I didn't really get along with spiritual leaders too well, just because I didn't really have too much of a faith before that. Starting in middle school, it started getting better. I started to pay attention in church more, started wanting to attend church more, and so I started having a little bit more of a connection with the pastor, the associate pastor, Sunday school teachers, whoever. Last but not least, with God, by no means do I take my relationship with God for granted, but I like to think I get along with God fairly well. I can't really think of a time when, God and I have necessarily been at odds. But what about you all? How do you tend to relate to various authority figures, whether that's parents, school authorities, governmental authorities, bosses and employers, spiritual leaders, or God? Let me know in the comments below. Number 7, when you make a mistake and sin, which of the following are you most likely to blame? Circumstances, bad timing, someone else, my sinful nature, my past, myself, God, something or someone else. I blame myself and my sinful nature. Definitely it is within human nature to sin. The Bible makes that very clear, but at the same time, there's a certain level of our choosing to sin. We know we're not supposed to have the cookies before dinner, but we are making that decision to eat those cookies, to get those cookies out of the cookie jar. We know that, drinking alcohol is sinful. I personally don't believe that, but some people do. So when they have a can of beer, they have a cup of wine, whatever, they are, there's a conscious choice being made to open that can, to open that bottle of wine, to pour out the wine. On a certain level, there is the only person we can blame is ourselves. We are making that conscious decision to hurt someone, to fulfill our own selfish desires. We are to blame first and foremost. I firmly believe that anyone else really blamed is anyone or anything else blamed is trying to make excuses, trying to make ourselves feel better. But that's me. What about you all? When you make a mistake and when you sin, who or what are you most likely to blame? Let me know in the comments. Number 8, what have you found helpful in waiting for God? Prayer, focusing on God's promises versus my circumstances, remembering how God has helped me in the past, by faith resist the urge to make something happen, something else. Definitely prayer, lifting up my impatience, lifting up my circumstances, lifting up my concerns, supplications, making my voice heard essentially to God and saying, hey, I have this problem. I need your help. Please help me. Feeling like I've put the ball in God's court, it's not on me now, does help me to be a little bit more patient. Also remembering how God has helped me in the past. Remembering where God has been for me when bad things have happened. Keeping that in mind has definitely helped me to be more patient in, remembering, okay, I didn't get an answer right away, but I did get it in time. Therefore, I can wait a little longer for God to answer. I can wait a little longer for God to take action, whatever it is. Those are my 2 go-tos. What about you all? What have you found helpful in waiting for God? Let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, we've gone to our last question, which of course is, how can we pray for you? If you do have prayer requests, please feel free to leave those in the comment section. Send me an email, send me a text, give me a phone call. Whatever you found helpful, however I can help you, please let me know. I am here for you all. Otherwise, that is our last lesson for this week. We still have 2 lessons left in this series. So until next week, stay well, stay safe, and God bless.